So what sparked your interest in model rocketry?
Well, I was about 6 years old, and I was walking home from school, walking through a cemetery, and I saw a couple of high schoolers launching rockets. I had no idea what they were, but I stood there mesmerized by it. They never really shared anything with me. They just flew. So that was my first exposure to it. And a couple of months later, I saw a model rocket in a hobby shop when my father was bringing me through. And I begged and pleaded and finally convinced him to buy me a Skyhook, and that's where it all began in 1963. And I like to tell people I'm a boar, not a bar, because I was born once. I've never left the hobby. So I've been doing rocketry for a long time.
And what gave you the idea to start FlisKits Incorporated?
It all came together, just a collection of events. I had already thought about starting a rocket company, and a friend of mine helped name it. Jim Meyer named the company. It was just going to be for fun, though. A couple of kits and not really make money on it, just get my designs out there. About the same time I got laid off from Digital Equipment Corporation. I spent months trying to find a job in a sea that was saturated with unemployed engineers. And it became obvious I wasn't going to be able to get back into that industry easily. About the same time, we had finished paying off our mortgage and our kids had gone off to college. So if we were to ever risk the finances of doing something like this was the time to do it. So I talked to my wife, and she agreed to give it a shot, and about 12 months later, I opened FlisKits.
Great. And what was the mission of the company?
More than anything, as I was getting frustrated with what I was seeing in rocketry at the time. There was so much ready to fly or almost ready to fly, 3 fins and a nose cone type of thing. I kind of left the corporate rocketry image, Centuri and Estes, in the early to mid-'70s, because I was getting frustrated with everything looked the same. And that's when I started scratch building. I actually started in the late 90s, or 60s rather. And I liked my designs better than what I was seeing. And I figured somebody else might like them too. When I would fly at the local club, people were saying constantly that I could sell these if I were to kit them up. And that was kind of the inspiration to do it.
Now, when you started the company, did you envision what it would later become?
Yes and no. I envisioned it growing a lot bigger than it did, but I realized that I would have to use other people's money to do that. And we really weren't interested in doing that. The one thing I liked about FlisKits is that it was bootstrapped. It survived on its own merits. It didn't survive or grow on somebody else's money. It entirely grew of its own. In the other respect, it became bigger than I anticipated. I really was not aware of the impact that I was having to the rocketry community, and it's been humbling to see it. The number of my kits that have been upscaled and downscaled, the number of kits of mine, designs of mine that I see flying at other launches, it's been a humbling experience, and I enjoy it.
And what's your philosophy for designing rockets?
Oh, yeah. Design rockets with a design tool, your head. Okay. I get very frustrated when I see people designing rockets with tools like RockSim. It's a wonderful tool, don't get me wrong, but it's a simulation tool, it's not a design tool. And if you design with whatever design tool you've got, whatever CAD/CAM system you've got, you find yourself restricted to what the tool is capable of doing. And then your designs start falling into it. It's the tool that is guiding your design. I do all my designs on paper. I do all my designs in my head. After I've got a design idea down to the point where I want to start prototyping, then I start putting it on the computer. And I simulate them on the field with a motor. People are constantly asking me for RockSim files of my designs, and they don't exist unless somebody else has done them. I do all my design, prototyping and testing in the field. I see if it's really going to fly. I don't simulate it. I actually do it.
Yeah, and I can remember being in a few CMAS launches
Yes.
where
you're... we make a point of letting folks know these are prototype launches, heads up. I very rarely have any kind of a mishap. If I'm flying an obscure or odd design, I typically do that on my own the first couple of times. The Acme is a perfect example of that. The very first prototype, which I still have downstairs, I went out to a field with my partner Brian McCarthy, and we set it up and pushed a button, and before the parachute came out, we both looked at each other and said, "We've got a new kit." We realized that was going to be a big one.
And can you describe some of your different other kits that you've made?
There are so many. At the time we closed, we had 88 products, 88 rocket kits in production. There are a lot of them. We've got some generic bland rockets. The Rhino, for example, is a very, it's a 4-fin and nose cone. There's not a lot of zing to it, but it's a great beginner rocket for groups. I noticed scale was very popular, and I wanted to get into scale, but I wanted to make a point of not doing the same scales that other companies have done, which led to things like the Goddard series and the Thunderbird rockets that are impressive. They're very neat looking. They a lot of times have a historical past, but typically aren't found on rocket shelves. So, but they sell very well. Scale models are very popular. And then my other excitement was the sci-fi futuristic type models, because the whole subject of science fiction is an interest of mine. So I tried to envision what it would be like, which is why many of my futuristic designs also come with backstories. You can either find them online or on the back of the documentation. I tell a story about the rocket as though it really existed, and that's been fun. It lets me write.
And then you come up with a number of cluster designs.
Oh yeah, clustering is a big thing. I don't so much anymore, but I used to get a lot of questions. Why am I clustering 3 motors when I can be more efficient with a single motor? And then I fly something like the Deuce, and you can't do that with a single motor. I don't care what. It's not just that I'm trying to get more power. There's an extra level of complexity with a cluster, and I like the added complexity. And there's just something cooler looking about a cluster going up, even if it's a parallel cluster like the Richter record. The larger flame tails, it's more impressive. I've never seen a cluster launch that I didn't like.
And what gave you the idea for the Deuces Wild?
I honestly don't know what gave me the idea for that. I first designed the Deuce back in the mid-'70s, I guess. And interestingly enough, it was a BT-55 based. And you had to modify the motor tubes heavily to get the two of them to fit in at that angle. When I decided to turn it into a kit, I went to a BT-60 because it made for it easier to assemble motor mount. I've actually thought of kind of recreating my BT-55 model just for the historical nostalgia that would bring. I built it and I flew it. I never had a problem with it. It was interesting that I published the plans for the BT-55 based version in our club newsletter, and I also published it in the CMAS newsletter, and nobody blinked an eye. I put it in a pretty package, hung it on a hook, and put a $15 price tag on it, and I couldn't make them fast enough. To this day, other than educational orders, the Deuces Wild is our best-selling kit, bar none.
And then there's been a number of upscale versions of it over the years.
That was first upscaled by Carl Telenko, 38 millimeter. But I've seen just about every size. I've seen I've done 24. I've seen 29, 38, 54, 75, 98. I've seen them all. And then I also have the Micromax version, obviously, and I have a motor mounted version using the 13 millimeter motor. So I think the Deuce has been done in every standard motor size there is.
Yeah, I remember reading about somebody did one with 2 M's once. So, yeah. And as you know, that's my favorite rocket. So
it's a lot of people's favorite rockets.
And then the Trez is 3 motors.
Trez is 3 motor. A lot of people, when I came out with the Deuce, immediately people were talking about, oh, you've got to do a 3 motor version. I did not want to do a 3 motor version of the Deuce. I didn't want to put a third motor in the Deuce because that to me didn't serve any kind of a purpose. So I just designed a whole new rocket with the concept of being a third motor. The tray looks like it's a 2-stage rocket. It isn't. It's begging to be converted. I could have made it a 2-stage kit, but if I did that, it would have knocked the complexity level way up, and I would have lost sales, frankly. But anybody who was interested in that type of thing, if they had the skills, they could certainly convert it. I know most of the upscales of the tray that have been made are 2-stage. You've got plenty of room with the electronics for it. I've got Carl Telenko's 38 millimeter upscale, and it's got a 54 millimeter sustainer. And I've flown it in single-stage mode. He's flown it in 2-stage mode, and it's a sight to see. It really is.
Yeah, I remember seeing that once, so yeah. And now, isn't there a problem if just one of the motors goes off?
Depending on how the model is built, when you're doing upscales, you'd have to really be careful of what you're doing. In the case of the kit Deuce, this does not apply to the tray, but in the case of the Deuce, the motors are angled approximately through the center of gravity of the rocket. So even if just one motor lights, the thrust angle, the motor is pushing through the center of gravity, so the rocket will still be stable. It'll go a little bit sideways, but it'll be pointed up the whole time. And there are exceptions to that depending on how you build it. I've had people build it and they change the size of the fins, or they change the weight in one way or another. Maybe they add a body tube or something. And then if they have one motor light, they get these arc flights. And I've had people come back to me saying, I heard this was stable on one motor and it's not. And I said, well, no, the design is stable. You change the design. And all bets are off at that point.
Yeah. And then how did you get into the styrofoam cup design?
Well, first,
Okay.
and I'll point this out, no such thing as a styrofoam cup. Styrofoam is a patented foam product made only by DuPont, and they don't make cups. So their foam cups is a different polystyrene foam. It's interesting. I first experienced foam cup rocketry at the Pearl River Mod Rock conventions in the early mid-'80s into the '90s. And I was fascinated by them. They were a lot of fun. I built many of them over the years. And when I started FlisKits, I was like, there's got to be room for a foam cup rocket in this. So I designed the decaffeinators, sort of a generic, 3-fin nose cone type of rocket. It's very basic. And it's sold like hotcakes. People just love this. And it was interesting because to the person, Rocketeers in the Northeast would say, finally, somebody did a foam cup rocket. Outside of the Northeast, almost to the person, people were saying, what is he, nuts? You can't fly a foam cup rocket. They had never heard of it before. But it's been a mainstay in the Northeast. In the North, I don't know why, I don't know where it came from, I don't know who originated it. But I did the decaffeinator, it did so well, I came out with the espresso, which is a miniature version of it. And then I did the U.F.O, and the U.F.O actually sells better than the decaffeinator. Big old flying saucer made out of foam cups.
Yeah, were there any flops, and do you care to comment on that?
I've actually only had a couple of design flops that went into production. And interestingly enough, the biggest, most expensive flop was the Proxima Centauri. I had 3 or 4 designs that I was playing with at the time. And I brought them all out to a CMAS launch to prototype fly them. People had been screaming for more balsa adapters instead of the paper adapters, more decals, bigger size. They were begging for all of this stuff. So I put all of those ideas into the Proxima Centauri. And a beautiful rocket, don't get me wrong, it's absolutely beautiful. And I brought it down along with 2 or 3 other prototypes I was playing with, and I let CMAS vote on which one they wanted to see put into production first. And the Proxima Centauri won, hands down. That was in production for about 4 years, and I've probably sold 20 of them.
Oh, no.
It has, without question, been the worst selling model that I put out there. And I think the biggest problem was the price tag. And the reason for the price tag was because we had a full sheet of decals, balsa wood nose cones, and big. You can't ask for those things and not expect the price hit.
Yeah. So any lessons learned from the flop? Or?
Yeah, don't listen to CMAS.
I think I'm going to edit that part.
I even told him that. No, I think it's it was. I started designing based on what I was getting as feedback from multiple sources, as opposed to looking at what I like in a rocket, what I see as valuable. My goal being teach one thing new in every design. And when I went back to that, I went back to designing rockets that were popular, because it turns out that is, in the end, what the people really wanted. They wanted to learn something, they wanted something that was cool or unique, something that stood out from the crowd at a reasonable price. And I could do that if I stuck to things like paper adapters and minimal decals. And I'd like to point out too, one of the problems, a lot of our kits have cut your own fins and no decals, and that's deliberate. And it's deliberate for what I think is a very important reason. If I give you a rocket with sheets of balsa wood in the fin pattern, it's your choice what fin you want to put on that rocket. If I give you laser cut fins, you're pretty much stuck. I've seen so many different fin designs on the Deuces Wild, it blows my mind, and they're all beautiful and they all fly. I give the builder the creative angst to do what you want. Here's what I suggest, but do what you want. And decals is another thing. The Farscape Night Whisperer, now called, is a perfect example. It's a black rocket and it's got white silkscreen decals. Every Farscape, every Night Whisperer I've seen, every one of them to the person look identical. You can line them up and you wouldn't be able to tell yours from the next one over. I've never seen two Acme Spitfires that look alike. Never.
Yeah.
Never. And it's because it doesn't come with decals and you have to cut your own fins. And that's what I want to give to the people. And I think in the end, that's what they appreciate. And even if they claim they want decals, in the end, I don't think they really do. So.
But it's hard to predict when you make a kit what's going to do well and what's not.
It is very hard. A lot of it, I think, has to do with how the rocket is presented. I like to make a point, especially for what I personally consider my better design, the Acme Spitfire, the Frick-n-Frack, the Decaffeinator, to announce them at larger events so that they get a lot of eyes right at the start. Because then the people who are really interested in that type of design, say somebody who's interested in saucers, not only do they get it, but they talk about it. And the more people who talk about it, the more I sell. Bar none of all of the different avenues that I've used to try to advertise our company and our products, word of mouth has been my best friend.
And then there's been some events like Deuce launches around the country that were organized, or
there we had a variety of different kit-specific launches. The Deuce is a big one. We had the Tour Deuce. Unfortunately, that was never completed, and the Deuces have disappeared someplace in the ether. We don't know where they wound up. But at various anniversaries, we've had clubs around the country at the time of our September anniversaries would send me notes saying that they're having a launch in our honor, and it's focused on, it would either be the Deuce, the Decaffeinator or foam rocket, the Frick-n-Frack, or some other classic rocket of FlisKits. And it's fun to be able to call some of them classics, because they are. And it's just interesting to hear back from these people after the launch and see dozens and dozens of one particular rocket going up.
Yeah, I remember at the Seaman's launch, we always did the Frick-n-Frack drag race.
Frick-n-Frack drag race has become a staple of a Seabass launch. You almost can't go to a Seabass launch without seeing a Frick-n-Frack drag race. And the thing that I love about that, we did that at a couple of high-powered launches. LDRS is a good example. And without fail, it never fails, we'll get 7, 8, or 9 of these Frick-n-Fracks. And for those of you who don't know, it's a 2-stage saucer. That stage is about 40 feet in the air, so it's a great demo to show people how rockets stage. So you get 8 of these on a pad, and all of a sudden you've got 16 rocket parts fluttering down out of the ground, or out of the sky after this massive launch. And these types of drag races will get bigger wows than a single motor M-powered bird off on the faraway pad. It's so much fun to see. Even the high-powered folks love it.
Now, how has the company evolved over the years?
Well, we started out with, in the first 3 months, 12 designs. I think we announced with about 6, but we had 12 in the pipeline. Our 12 original designs, most of which were still in production at the time of closing. And I knew, because I'd seen it many times, I knew what the problem was with most small rocket companies. Most small rocket companies that I saw at the time and since, they would come out with 3 or 4 beautiful rockets. Don't get me wrong, I saw some beautiful designs out there coming from these rockets. It was like, okay, this is exciting. And a year and a half later, they'd have the same 4 or 5 rockets and wonder why their sales are drying up. You've got a very small audience. The people would buy their 4 or 5 rockets, and then they're waiting for the next big thing. So for years, I came out with anywhere from 2 to 5 new designs every year, like clockwork. People were anticipating them. We typically announce new rockets at big events like at NARRAM or NSL at our anniversary launch. But we were always coming out with something new. We rarely discontinued anything. So people had a reason to come back to our website. People had a reason to come and see what new thing we had. And while they're there, oh, geez, I've always wanted one of these. They'd buy something else. That, more than anything, is what has kept the company growing as strong and becoming as popular as it did.
And how has the hobby evolved over the years since when you first started the company?
That's actually a tough one. I saw high-powered rocketry grow from being this weirdo, dangerous hobby over here kind of on the outskirts of rocketry, something that your typical rocketeer shunned because you're going to get us all in trouble, to a strong, growing, respected hobby. I do notice that it's funny because I see three distinct types of rocketeers out there. You have your low power bigot, wants nothing to do with high power, thinks it's dangerous, is going to get us all in trouble. You've got your high powered bigot, they don't understand why we still play with these little toys. And then you've got, to me, the true rocketeer or rocket connoisseur, where we love everything. I've never done high-powered rocketry. I've never been certified, and I absolutely love it. The main reason I don't do high-powered rocketry is I don't have a place to fly them, I don't have a place to store them, and I'm not spending that much money.
Yeah.
That's what it boils down to. I frequently have people ask me when we're going to come out with a high-powered bird. That the model rocketry environment has been saturated. There's nothing left to do.
Yeah.
And then I come out with the Deuces Wild, the Acme Spitfire, the Plum Island Sound, the Frick-n-Frack, and I'm sorry, I'm not listening. It's not all been done, not by a far shot.
And would you say the hobby's more vibrant now than years ago?
It's interesting there too. I think that I started FlisKits at the beginning of a real heyday in rocketry. And then I over the years, I think it grew and then kind of flattened out. It probably flattened out during the lawsuit that we had with respect to high-powered rocketry and ammonium perchlorate. And I think the hobby took a hit with that because I think it painted perceptions. I used to be able to go into a school or at a town official and say, I want to put on a rocket launch. And there would be a bunch of, that'll be exciting, can we come? And then I ran into a period where all of a sudden I had to bring proof of safety, proof of insurance. There were questions asked that were never asked before. And I am firmly convinced that that had an impact to the hobby. I see the hobby growing again. I think Estes is under good ownership now. And that's exciting for me. I think FlisKits is going to continue to grow and be a major contributor to the industry, and it's exciting for me to see my design still out there. I'd like to see other small companies that are out there doing more, frankly. But I think the opportunity, I think the growing is happening again. I think the opportunity for great growth is there.
Yeah, I think around 1980 when ammonium perchlorate motors, that kind of sparked high-powered rocketry, because then you could go from a larger motor, then you could just, because people were making these massive clusters with black powder.
Right.
And then that was the Apollo era, kind of through then, but now it's the 50th anniversary of Apollo.
There you go.
Yeah, you're right. So, all right. Now, how do you see model rocketry as a family activity?
Oh, oh yeah. It depends on the family. And I've impressed upon my kids, and their kids for that matter, you don't have to participate in the hobby to enjoy the hobby. I love when my kids can join me out on the field. Neither one of them are that much into rocketry, but they love seeing the rockets, they love seeing other people's rockets. They love, if you belong to a club that is very family friendly, and CMAS is one of them, it makes for a fun time for your family members, even if they're not that much into rocketry. As for it being a family hobby, I think that's a little tough, but I think that's true of any hobby. You might be into fishing, it doesn't necessarily mean anybody else in your family is, or rock climbing, or whatever. I think it's very rare for any kind of a hobby type activity that the family gets involved. Everybody has their own interests.
And what has your involvement been with the CMAS Club?
Well, interestingly, I was at the founding meeting of CMAS. I had recently founded the Goddard Society, and we started NEMROC, the New England Model Rocket Convention. And it was about that time that Chris Tavares was interested in starting his own club in Massachusetts. So he called me up and invited me and my club members down for a kickoff meeting to CMAS. I can't remember who else was there. I believe they've only got one, maybe two of the founding members. I know Steve Michaels was one of the early members. But we got them going, and they partnered with us on NEMROC for many years. That was the second largest convention in the country, second to Pearl River. And when Pearl River came to an end, we became the largest. The reason we started NEMROC was our entire club was scheduled to go to MITCON, the MIT Rocket Convention. And at the last minute, MITCON pulled it, canceled it, and that was the last MITCON. And we were desperate. We were just jonesing for a convention, so we did NEMROC. And it finally grew to be the largest convention in the country for a number of years. That was exciting until the Goddard Society broke up. We all got busy with our lives. Our kids were growing up. We had other things we had to take care of.
And who are some of the memorable people at some of the CMAS launches?
We never attracted that many, people that I know, perhaps. Gary Hughes was a big part of what we were doing. Steve Michaels, Chris Tavares, obviously. Chris is a name that a lot of people watching this would probably be familiar with. He was the founding member of CMAS and was president of the club for more years than I can count. Arnie Pay, names that I'm familiar with. Tony Vincent, Bill Spadafora, obviously, is another name that a lot of people might be familiar with. We had a lot of names, and again, that I'm familiar with. I'm not sure how wide known they'd be, though.
And Claude Mania always has a lot of...
Claude Mania, Tony Vincent.
And he makes the beautiful finishes.
Yes, Tony, Tony has been one of my prototype builders for a lot of years. He's built some of the show models that I use to take photos for cover art and that kind of thing. Oh yeah, he does a beautiful job.
And what are some of your memories of Bill Spadafora?
Yeah, Bill Spadafora and I go way back. Only in the world of rocketry, though. We never really socialized outside of rocketry. Interesting sense of humor. He had a very dry sense of humor. I went through a period where I was launching, I had this Sprite rocket from Estes that I purchased in '73. In fact, I called it the Sprite 73. And I was trying to get it up to 500 flights. And I did succeed in doing that. Vern Estes, in fact, launched it on Flight 500. But I was trying desperately to get it up to that number. And Bill Spadafora got absolutely sick and tired of watching me fly that rocket. I would go down to a launch and I'd have 20 launches and 15 of them would be that rocket. Not the Sprite, the Sprint.
Okay.
The Sprint.
Yeah.
And the rocket was pretty cool because other than the shock cord and the streamer, it was 100% stock. There was nothing replaced on that bird. So that was kind of cool.
Yeah. I remember him describing, he'd rebuilt one rocket so many times the only thing left was the launch slug.
Yeah.
That was some of his sense of humor. And can you describe some of your education and outreach activities?
Oh, yeah. I've been doing rocketry outreach for 40 years. FlisKits gave me a better avenue to do it, and I could do more of it. But I've been doing educational outreach for more years than I can count. The nice thing about FlisKits is it allowed me to reach out with what I felt was a better selection of rockets for classes that would really teach rocketry. And when I did it in the Northeast, where I was not only supplying the rockets but also supplying the teacher, me, it allowed me to teach rocketry the way I felt it needs to be taught. When you're working with a young group, a good example is I do Pollard Elementary School in Plastow every year since our first year of operation. Okay, so this coming spring will be my 16th year of teaching their entire 4th grade about rockets. When working with youth groups or young groups like that, I see so many people trying to immediately bring to them the science of rocketry. And it's really cool, don't get me wrong, I'm not dissing anybody who does this. But you're bringing a level of complexity to a group too young to really appreciate it and understand it. And I believe that you lose them. I believe that you sour the hobby to an extent, making this too much like schoolwork. Okay. What I do is I like to bring to them the science wonder of rocketry. When I go and I talk the science of rocketry, I talk about the moon landing, I talk about the International Space Station, what we're discovering on Mars, and the fact that Voyager is still working. These are the things that I talk to them. Something that's going to make them go, whoa! Now I've got them. I explain to them the fun and ease of building and decorating a rocket. I show them how they fly. I don't get into the science of how they fly. If they have an interest in the wow factor of what we talked about and the fun of building a rocket, they will find out. When a student asks me a question about it, well, how does pushing the button make the igniter fire the motor? Ah, okay. You've now expressed an interest in that piece of the science, and I'll explain it. But I'm not going to go into a class of fourth graders and start hitting them with these equations here. And, you know, what makes a rocket stable and what's aerodynamics and what do I mean, you know, center of gravity. No, that's just going beyond them. And we've lost the fun. I want to get them wowed on science and space and giggling about the fun they're having with the rockets. Once that happens, I've got them.
Great.
So that's my philosophy.
And what precipitated your decision to pass FlisKits along to someone else?
Boy, that was actually a lot of things. You talk about my educational outreach. What I absolutely love to do is educate. Simply because I had the time. I've been working as a paraeducator with students with special needs at our local high school. I did that for 8 years and absolutely loved the impact that I was having with students, working with them one-on-one. I then worked with the state of New Hampshire to get my certification to letter of eligibility, actually, not certification, to teach math and science at the from 5th to 12th grade level, and started looking for jobs at the high school to teach. Several jobs came up, but because I didn't have my certification, they were a little leery on hiring me. So I didn't have any success there, but knew that's where I wanted to go. Well, as a paraeducator, I'd leave work at 2:15 when the bell rang, and I was done. I was absolutely done. There was nothing else that I had to do until the next morning. So I had all my afternoons and weekends to do FlisKits, and that was more than enough time to handle what I needed to do. If, however, I took a job as a teacher, that would come to an end. I wouldn't be able to do both and be successful at both. And I wanted to teach, so that's what I decided. I'm going to continue looking for a teaching job, but I need to dissolve FlisKits now while I have the time. I didn't want to just shut the doors because I felt what I had was too valuable to the community. So I found somebody, Ray DiPaola, who was interested in buying it, and a person that I felt would respect what FlisKits represents to the community.
And that was my next question, is FlisKits in good hands now?
Yeah, I believe it is, because it's in the hand. And this, by the way, is what has me so excited about Estes. Both Estes and FlisKits are in the hands of Rocketeers who are passionate about the hobby. So I'm excited for the future of FlisKits for the same reason I'm excited about the future of Estes. They're in the right hands, both of them. They complement each other. They don't compete. A lot of people have asked me, what's it like competing with Estes? I don't compete with Estes. Every time I sell a Deuces Wild, Estes sells 3 packs of motors. You know, no, we're not in competition. We sell to a different audience. Okay. In a lot of cases, we sell to the same audience, but we complement each other. We complement each other well. I've had a very good working relationship with Estes over the years. Estes was the primary supporter of the kit designs that I did for conventions long before FlisKits. I was a major kit designer for Pearl River as well as Merrimack. Estes donated all the parts to do that. I was so thrilled to get information and pictures of Mary Roberts' retirement because she was a key player in that. And over the years, I've had to work with legal things with Estes when they wanted to use a name that was close to one of my rockets, or vice versa. And we've worked very well, very professionally. And I was just thrilled to find out they were under new ownership. And now with FlisKits, as sad as it was to move away from it, it was the right move at the right time. I now teach at a local community college, and I thoroughly enjoy that. And I absolutely do not have time to design, kit, and ship model rockets anymore, so I'm glad to have moved on.
But you still have a hand with some new designs you mentioned?
I do have my hand in there. I no longer own FlisKits, but I will still be working with them. Ray likes the idea of pinging me for design ideas and very possibly even doing the documentation for them. Right now he is up to his neck in alligators, as it were. He and his partner came and took a truckload of FlisKits. We emptied our facility out, so he's got all the materials, he's got all the documentations, all the designs, all the licenses, and like I said, we had, at the time of our closing, 88 kits and over 250 parts and accessories, probably close to 500,000 body tubes, and I couldn't even guess how much balsa wood.
And you didn't have that all here, did you?
No. My house here was our shipping and receiving.
Okay.
This is where we after we kitted rockets up, we'd bring them here and I stored them downstairs, and I did all the packing and shipping, and obviously this is where all the design work happens. But yeah, there was a lot. FlisKits had a lot of stuff, and Ray's got to go through that. It's a monumental task. And it's probably a mix of, oh my God, we have so much work to do, versus, oh my God, look at this, it's a box with 25,000 engine blocks in it. This is epic. There's definitely a nirvana moment to Scratch Builder, and that's what I am, to open up a box and it's got tens of thousands of a particular part that you're always running out of.
Great. And you were at the Cato launch yesterday. You'll still be going to local launches a lot?
No, I was not at the Cato launch. FlisKits was at the Cato launch.
Okay.
And it's actually interesting to. I'll reply to a FlisKits post in my Facebook, and I get a note in Facebook saying Jim Flis replied to your post, because it still sees me as the owner of that page on Facebook, but it's not me, it's Ray. But no, I had contemplated going down, but it was too short of notice. I'm definitely going to be attending some of the launches, and I'm definitely going to invite Ray to come up to some CMAS launches. He will be very well received. I was a fixture at CMAS launches since the first CMAS launch after our opening in September of 2002.
And you did the annual launch every year?
Did the annual launch. That became a fixture thing, so yes, the FlisKits and the cake. In fact, I've got to find a way. Ray, if you're watching this, I've got to find a way of talking Ray into coming up to FlisKits hosted anniversary launch there. I'd even be willing to supply the cake. That is CMAS. I think more than FlisKits and Rockets itself. I think CMAS is going to miss